I shouldn't have done it. I knew it was wrong, knew exactly what it meant, knew the kind of woman it made me. And yet, there I was, watching the lawn guy from the kitchen window, feeling things I hadn't felt in a long time. Not like this, not with my husband, not with anyone. His name was Travis. He was young, much younger than me, with the kind of lean, strong body that came from real work, not just lifting weights in an air-conditioned gym. The kind of body that could pin a woman down, make her feel something beyond the predictable routine of marriage. He was mowing the lawn, shirtless under the afternoon sun, sweat running down his chest. I should have looked away. I didn't. I told myself I was just watching, that it was harmless, that it wasn't like I was going to do anything. But I knew better. My husband, Mark, was predictable, reliable, the kind of man who paid the bills on time, mowed the lawn when he remembered, and kissed me goodnight without ever really looking at me. There had been a time when that stability felt like love. Now, it just felt like waiting for something that was never going to happen. It started with something small, a conversation, an excuse to offer him a drink when he finished the lawn. I was wearing a sundress, the kind that clung just enough to remind a man that I was still a woman. "Looks like hard work out there," I said, handing him a glass of lemonade. He wiped the sweat off his forehead, took the glass. "It's not too bad." His voice was deep, with a lazy drawl that made my stomach tighten in ways it shouldn't. "Could be worse." I leaned against the door frame, watching him drink. He didn't just sip. He downed half of it in one go, throat working, jaw tight. "What do you do when you're not mowing lawns?" I asked. He smirked, tilting the glass toward me. "You mean when I'm not getting sunburned?" I smiled. "Something like that. Work out, hang out with friends, not much else." He let his eyes move over me then, not too fast, not too slow, just enough for me to feel it. "What about you?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, you know, laundry, groceries, the thrilling life of a suburban wife." Something passed between us then. He didn't say anything, just held my gaze for a second longer than he should have. Long enough that my skin felt too hot, too tight. I shouldn't have done it, but I did. The next week, when he came back, I was waiting for him. I'd put on a dress that was just a little too low, a little too tight. I made sure my husband was at work, made sure there was no one else around, and then I walked outside, ice water in my hand, knowing exactly what I was doing. "Thought you might be thirsty," I said, my voice smoother than it had been in years. Travis looked up from the mower, his eyes going right to my legs before dragging up the rest of me. This time, he didn't bother looking away. "Thanks," he said, stepping closer, close enough that I could smell him. Grass, sweat, something unmistakably male. I handed him the glass, fingers brushing, a slow, deliberate touch. "You work hard," I said. "You deserve a break." He smirked, his gaze locked on mine. "That so?" I nodded, letting my lips curve just slightly, just enough to let him know. It wasn't just in my head. It was real, the charge between us, the way his breathing changed, the way mine did too. I should have ended it there. I should have walked away, but instead, I took a step closer. "What else do you deserve?" I asked, voice barely above a whisper. His fingers tightened around the glass. "You tell me." And just like that, the line was crossed. It didn't happen all at once, not yet. But that moment, standing there in the yard, the afternoon sun burning down on us, I knew. I knew where this was going. I knew how it would end, and I knew that I wasn't going to stop it. The next time Travis came over, my husband was working late. He'd texted me earlier in the day, something about a meeting running long, an excuse I barely read before deleting the message. It wasn't that I didn't care. I did, or at least, I used to. Before everything became routine, before I stopped feeling like I existed outside of being someone's wife. Travis knocked on the back door instead of the front, like he already knew, like we'd made some kind of unspoken arrangement. When I opened it, he was standing there, fresh from trimming the hedges, sweat clinging to his skin, his shirt slung over his shoulder. He didn't smile. He just looked at me, waiting, like we both knew why he was there. "You want some water?" I asked. But my voice was different this time. Heavier, loaded. He stepped inside without answering, and I let the door swing shut behind him. The kitchen felt too small, the air too thick. I was aware of every inch of my own body, the way my dress clung to me, the way his eyes moved over me with something just shy of patience. He was waiting for me to make the next move. I swallowed. I shouldn't be doing this. His lips quirked up, but he didn't step back. "But you are." I let out a breath, half a laugh, but it died in my throat when he set his glass down on the counter, his fingers grazing mine. That was all it took, the first touch, the thing I knew I wouldn't be able to take back. I let my hand linger there, let the heat of his skin seep into mine. My heartbeat pulsed in my ears, drowning out everything else. He was close enough now that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, the scent of him, fresh-cut grass, sweat, something else, something that made my stomach clench in anticipation. I should have pulled away. Instead, I looked up at him, really looked, and I knew I wasn't going to stop. Not now. Not ever. His fingers moved first, a slow drag up my wrist, over my forearm, until his hand wrapped around my elbow, drawing me in. My breath hitched. My body betrayed me, leaning into him before my mind could catch up. His mouth was right there, close enough that I could feel the heat of it, and when he dipped his head, I didn't stop him. I tilted my chin, met him halfway, let his lips press against mine in a way that wasn't soft, wasn't hesitant. It was something else, something dangerous. I gasped against his mouth, my hands gripping his arms, feeling the strength beneath them. He kissed me like he knew exactly what I needed, like he'd known since the first time I handed him that damn lemonade. When he pulled back, his breathing was uneven. So was mine. His fingers traced my jaw, his thumb running over my bottom lip, and for a moment, we just stood there, the weight of what we were doing pressing down on us like a loaded gun. "I should go," he murmured, but his hand said otherwise, still anchored to my waist, still keeping me close. I shook my head. "Stay?" He hesitated, just for a second. Then he kissed me again, harder this time, more certain. I melted into it, let him pull me against him, let my body press against the hard planes of his. His hands roamed, fingers mapping places that had been untouched for too long. My nails dug into his shoulders, and he groaned, a deep sound that made my stomach twist with something dark and thrilling. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway sent us scrambling apart. My chest was heaving, my lips swollen, and Travis's eyes were dark, his breathing uneven. My heart was a hammer against my ribs as I smoothed down my dress, panic clawing its way into my throat. "I have to," I whispered, voice shaking. He nodded once, grabbed his shirt, and slipped out the back door, just as my husband's keys jingled at the front. I turned, heart still racing, hands trembling as I reached for a glass of water to steady myself. When Mark walked in, he barely glanced at me, dropping his briefcase by the door with a tired sigh. "Long day," he muttered, rubbing his temples. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I could still feel the ghost of Travis's hands on my skin, the taste of him on my lips. I should have felt guilty. Maybe a part of me did, but it wasn't enough to stop me from wanting more. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. The next time Travis came, I told myself I'd keep my distance, that I wouldn't cross the line again, that the moment we had was just that. A moment, a slip, a mistake. But when I saw him standing in my backyard with the sun glinting off his bare shoulders, I knew I'd been lying to myself. He didn't knock this time. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked right up to the back door and stood there, watching me through the screen. I was making coffee, my hand shaking as I set the mug down. I should have told him to leave. I should have stepped outside, put a stop to this before it spiraled further. But I didn't. I opened the door. "Hey," he said, his voice lower than usual, as if he already knew what was about to happen. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. "You shouldn't be here." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes dragging down my body like he had all the time in the world. "You want me to go?" I should have said yes. I should have shut the door. Instead, I stepped aside. The moment he was inside, the air changed. It was thick, charged, humming with something we couldn't take back. He smelled like sweat and cut grass. Something raw and real, so different from the expensive cologne my husband wore. He didn't reach for me right away. He just stood there, waiting, watching. I wet my lips. "Travis, this isn't..." He took a step closer, then another, until there was barely any space between us. "Tell me to leave," he murmured. I opened my mouth. No words came out, because I didn't want him to leave, not even a little. He reached up, his fingers brushing my cheek, tracing down my jaw. His touch was careful, almost hesitant, like he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. I leaned into it. And that was all he needed. His mouth was on mine before I could think, before I could even catch my breath. His hands were in my hair, at my waist, pulling me against him, and I let him. I wanted him to. My fingers dug into his back, feeling the heat of his skin, the tension in his muscles. He kissed me like he'd been waiting for this, like he knew exactly how much I needed it. When he pulled back, his breathing was ragged. His eyes were dark, searching mine for something I wasn't sure I could name. "We can't," I started, but the words felt weak, meaningless, especially with my hands still gripping his arms, still holding on like I didn't want to let go. He smirked, shaking his head. "You don't believe that." And I didn't. The sound of my phone vibrating on the counter made both of us freeze. My heart slammed against my ribs as I turned to look. Mark's name flashed across the screen. I hesitated for only a second before pressing ignore. Travis watched me, his lips curving up at the corners. "That your husband?" I let out a shaky breath. "Yeah." His hands tightened on my waist. "And you don't feel guilty?" I should have. I knew that. But all I felt was the way Travis's fingers dug into me, the way his lips hovered just over mine, the way my body ached for something I'd been missing for too long. "No," I whispered. His smile was slow, wicked. "Good." The next time Mark texted, I didn't even look at my phone. I already knew what it would say. Another late meeting, another excuse, another night alone. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. I was playing with fire, and I didn't care. Not one bit. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, I couldn't stop thinking about Travis. The way his hands felt. The way he looked at me like I was something more than just someone's wife. Like I was still a woman worth wanting. Mark was snoring softly beside me, his arm draped across his chest, his face slack with exhaustion. I turned onto my side, staring at the ceiling, my heart pounding in my ears. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, my skin still tingling from earlier, my body still aching for something I couldn't have. Or maybe I could. Maybe that was the problem. The next morning, I went about my usual routine, making breakfast, tidying up, pretending like everything was normal. Mark barely looked at me as he grabbed his coffee, already distracted by his phone, reading emails, planning his day. He kissed me on the cheek before heading out the door, the kind of absent-minded kiss that meant nothing at all. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the empty kitchen, my fingers resting where his lips had been. Then, without thinking, I picked up my phone and sent a message. "Come over." It didn't take long for Travis to reply. "On my way." I should have been nervous. I should have felt something other than anticipation. But when I heard the knock on the back door, I didn't hesitate. I opened it, and there he was. That same smirk playing on his lips, the same look in his eyes that made my stomach twist. "Miss me already?" he teased. I didn't answer. Instead, I grabbed him by the shirt, pulled him inside, and let the door shut behind us. Time blurred after that. One moment, we were in the kitchen, hands roaming, mouths clashing. The next, we were upstairs, in the bedroom I shared with my husband. The bed where I'd spent countless nights, lying awake, wondering when things had gone cold. And now, here I was, doing something I couldn't take back. Something I didn't want to take back. When it was over, we lay there in silence, the weight of what we'd done pressing down on us. Travis propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at me, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "You're trouble," he murmured. I laughed, breathless. "And you're not?" He reached out, tracing a finger down my arm. "I think we both know we're past the point of pretending this won't happen again." He was right, and as much as I wanted to deny it, I didn't, because I already knew I wasn't done with him, not even close. The days started to blur together after that. Every morning, I went through the motions: breakfast, small talk, goodbye kisses that meant nothing. And then, the moment Mark was gone, my phone would be in my hand. I didn't even have to say much anymore. Travis knew. He'd show up like clockwork, slipping through the back door, his hands on me before I could even say his name. We never talked about what it meant. We didn't need to. It wasn't love. It wasn't some desperate attempt to fix something broken in my marriage. It was a hunger, pure and simple, one that I had ignored for so long, I'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Until now, until him. One afternoon, as he was buttoning up his shirt, I leaned against the dresser, watching him. He caught my stare in the mirror and smirked. "What?" I shrugged, biting back a smile. "You seem pretty comfortable here." He turned, stepping toward me, fingers grazing the strap of my dress, slipping it off my shoulder just enough to make me shiver. Maybe I am. I knew I should have told him to be careful, that we couldn't keep doing this, that it was bound to catch up with us, but I didn't. Instead, I let him kiss me again, let him press me back against the dresser, let him ruin me all over again. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and I didn't care. Then one evening, Mark came home early. I had just barely managed to shove Travis out the back door when I heard the garage door open. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. The sheets were still warm, the air still heavy with the scent of what had just happened. I rushed to open a window, fanning the air, praying Mark wouldn't notice anything. He walked in, loosening his tie, giving me a tired smile. "Hey, didn't think I'd be home this early, huh?" I forced a laugh, my hands shaking as I reached for a glass of wine. "No, how was your day?" He sighed, dropping onto the couch. "Exhausting. I think I might just take a shower and head to bed early." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. As he walked past me, he paused, his brows furrowing just slightly. I held my breath, waiting. His eyes flicked toward the window, then back to me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded quickly. "Yeah, just tired." He hesitated for a second, then leaned in and kissed my cheek. "All right, don't stay up too late." I watched him disappear down the hall, my entire body tense, my fingers gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles ached. I had gotten away with it. Barely. But I wasn't stupid. I knew this was getting dangerous. And still, the next morning, I sent Travis another message. Because I couldn't stop, and because I didn't want to. A few weeks passed, and the secrecy of it all only made things more addictive. We found more excuses, riskier ways to see each other. Sometimes it was right after Mark left for work. Other times, in the afternoon, when I knew he'd be tied up in meetings. Every time I thought about slowing down, I found myself pulling Travis back in, craving his touch like an addiction I couldn't shake. Then, something changed. One night, Mark asked me to sit down at the dining table. His voice was calm, but his expression wasn't. He studied me in a way he hadn't in years, a look of quiet assessment that made my stomach turn. "What's going on with you?" he asked. I swallowed hard, keeping my face neutral. "What do you mean?" "You've been different," he said carefully. "Distant, distracted, and He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "I feel like I don't know what's happening anymore." I forced a smile, shaking my head. "Mark, you're working late all the time. I've just been—" "No," he interrupted, his eyes sharper now. "This isn't just about work." He leaned forward, voice lower. "Tell me the truth." I stared at him, my heart racing. The truth? The truth would tear everything apart. So I lied. "I've just been lonely," I whispered. "That's all." He watched me for a long moment, his jaw tense, his fingers tapping against the table. Then finally, he nodded. "All right." I exhaled in relief, forcing myself to keep my hands steady as I reached for my glass of water. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before he put the pieces together. The next time Travis came over, I was on edge. The thrill was still there. But now, so was the paranoia. Every time my phone buzzed, I nearly jumped. Every time I heard a noise outside, I held my breath. "You're nervous," Travis said, watching me from the bed, his body half covered by the sheets. "I think Mark suspects something." He propped himself up on his elbow. "And?" I swallowed hard. "And if he finds out?" Travis smirked. "What? You think he'll leave you?" I stared at him, my stomach twisting. "I don't know." He shrugged, reaching for his shirt. "You're too afraid of getting caught." I let out a dry laugh. "Of course I am. Aren't you?" He pulled the shirt over his head, looking at me with something unreadable in his expression. "Maybe not as much as you." I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Travis ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "It means I'm not the one with something to lose." I stared at him, something shifting in my chest. He was right. Mark was my safety net, my stability, the life I'd built. And yet, I couldn't stay away from Travis. I wasn't sure if it was love. I didn't think so. But it was something powerful, something dangerous, and something told me we were running out of time before it all came crashing down. The guilt came in waves, but never strong enough to stop me. Some nights, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had let it go this far. Other nights, I turned toward Mark, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, waiting for some kind of revelation to come over me, some force to tell me to put an end to it. But nothing came. Instead, I kept falling deeper. The thrill, the secrecy, the way Travis made me feel. It was like I had been asleep for years, and now I was wide awake, every nerve on fire. The weight of marriage, the dull predictability of my life, had become something I wanted to escape. And Travis was my escape. Then one evening, it all came crashing down. Mark was supposed to be working late again. Another meeting, another excuse, another night where I knew exactly how my evening would go. Travis was already inside, his hands on me before the door even shut behind him. I barely had time to breathe before we were tangled together, my back against the couch, his lips at my neck, and then the sound of the garage door. I froze. Travis lifted his head, his eyes wide, but neither of us moved fast enough. The front door swung open. Mark stepped inside, briefcase in hand, his tired expression shifting the second his eyes landed on us. The room went silent. No sound, no movement. Just the three of us, frozen in place. I could feel the way my body was positioned. My dress slightly askew, Travis too close. Mark wasn't stupid. He didn't need an explanation. The truth was right there in front of him, screaming in the space between us. His grip on his briefcase tightened. His jaw clenched, his breathing slow and controlled. "Get out!" It wasn't a yell. It wasn't some outburst of rage. It was worse. The quiet, measured tone. The restraint. Travis hesitated, looking at me like maybe he expected me to say something, but I couldn't move, couldn't think. I watched as he grabbed his shirt, as he walked past Mark and out the door without another word. And then there was just the two of us. Mark didn't speak at first. He set his briefcase down carefully, like every movement had to be controlled. Then he looked at me, really looked at me, like he was searching for the wife he thought he knew. "How long?" His voice was low, steady. I swallowed, my throat dry. "A few months." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "Right." He nodded, pressing his lips together. "And you were just going to keep doing this? Sneaking around while He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "I should have seen it. I should have." "Mark, Don't!" he snapped, his voice breaking for the first time. "Don't say you're sorry. Don't lie to me now." I opened my mouth, but there was nothing I could say. No excuses, no way to soften what I had done. He looked at me for a long time, his eyes empty in a way that made my stomach turn. "I'll be gone in the morning. You don't have to say anything." He walked past me, down the hall, into our bedroom. A door shut, and just like that, it was over. I stood there, the weight of everything settling on my chest. The affair, the thrill, the lies. I had told myself none of it mattered, that it was just something I needed. But now, standing alone in the silence, I finally felt the truth. It hadn't just been about Travis. It had been about something deeper, something broken in me. And now, I had to face it alone. The next morning, Mark was gone before I woke up. His side of the bed was empty, the closet half full where his clothes used to be. He had taken only what he needed. No note, no last words, just absence. I sat in bed for a long time, staring at the place where he had slept for years. My fingers tangled in the sheets. It didn't feel real. The house was too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to do something, anything. I finally dragged myself out of bed and wandered through the house, looking for proof that Mark had really left. The bathroom sink was missing his razor. His side of the dresser was empty. His scent still lingered in the air, but it was fading, just like everything else. By noon, I still hadn't cried. I kept waiting for the grief to hit, but it never came. Only a dull ache, a sense of something slipping through my fingers that I didn't know how to hold on to. I had destroyed my marriage. And for what? I didn't call Travis. He didn't call me either. We both knew whatever we had wasn't built to last. It had never been about forever. It had been about escape, about the way he made me feel in stolen moments. But now, those moments were gone, and I was left with the mess I had made. That afternoon, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay here, not in this house, with its 2 quiet rooms and empty spaces where Mark used to be. I needed to go somewhere, anywhere, just to breathe again. I left the front door unlocked, not because I expected Mark to come back, but because I wasn't sure if I ever would. I walked outside, feeling the sun on my face, the warmth that should have comforted me, but didn't. And then I kept walking.